Hey everyone, this is section 1.8. We're going to look at the multiplication and division of real numbers. The rules used in doing multiplication and division of signed numbers are similar to those of addition and subtraction. Note, however, that they are not exactly the same. So first, before doing the multiplication and division, make sure all grouping symbols have been handled. For example, plus with parentheses are ignored or both removed, and a negative and parentheses are changed to opposites. This leaves problems that have only one sign in front of each number. The first number, being positive, may not have the plus sign written. In multiplication, parentheses may be used to represent multiplication, but they will have no sign between them, and we have seen that before. We're always moving from left to right in the expression, and we're going to look at the numbers two at a time. If the numbers have the same sign, you multiply or divide, and your answer is going to be positive. If the numbers have opposite signs, you're still going to multiply or divide, but then your answer is going to be negative. So two positives or two negatives, the answer is positive, and one positive and one negative, the answer is negative. So when we're looking at multiplication, the product of two real numbers with different signs is found by multiplying their absolute values. The product is negative. Thus, for any real numbers, a and b, negative a times b equals negative ab. So you multiply the numbers that you see. It says using their absolute value. So you forget about whether they're positive or negative. And then if there's one negative sign, your answer is negative. And similarly, when the product of two real numbers with the same sign, you multiply the numbers, again, ignoring the sign, and then look at the signs. If you have two positives or two negatives, your answer is positive. And again, our example would be negative a times negative b would be a positive ab. And then when we're multiplying by 0, anything times 0 is 0, as you know, and 0 is neither positive nor negative. It's just 0, and so you don't have to worry about if there's a negative number multiplied by a 0 that you write negative 0. You don't use negative signs with 0. So let's take a look at a couple examples. And so for A, we have 7 times 5, which is 35. And then we'll take a look at the signs. I see that the 7 was negative, so we have one negative sign, so our answer stays negative. For B, we have 10 times 3 to get 30. And then if we look at our signs, we had a negative with a 10 and a negative with a 30. So I think that one negative and then the other negative twists and makes it into a plus sign. And so our answer is going to be positive 30. For C, we have 2 times 6 times 3. Remember, the commutative property says that order doesn't matter in multiplication, so I like to do 2 times 3, which is 6, and then 6 times the middle 6 gives me 36. And notice we have 3 negative signs now. So 2 of the negatives, you can think of as they cancel each other out, or they build a positive or plus sign. But then we have a third negative, so our answer is going to be negative. D shows us that property that any number times 0 is 0. And E and F, we're dealing with side numbers now with fractions. So we have negative 1/5 times 2/3. And so we're just going to multiply straight across. 1 times 2 is 2. 5 times 3 is 15. And then again with the signs, we only had one negative, and so our answer stays negative. For F, we have negative 4/5, and we're multiplying it by negative 30. So let's put our negative 30 over 1, so we can think of top times top and bottom times bottom. Again, I like to simplify first if I can. I see that 5 and 30 are both multiples of 5, so I'm going to cancel a 5 on the bottom. 5 divided by 5 is 1. And I'm going to divide out 5 from 30, and 30 divided by 5 is 6. And so on the top, I have 4 times 6, which is 24. 1 times 1 is 1 on the bottom, which I'm not even going to write because I would still have to simplify it to get rid of it. And then I see my two negatives build a positive. So my answer here is a positive 24. So dividing, or the quotient of real numbers, pretty much follows the same thing. We're looking at the same idea for signs. The quotient of two real numbers with different signs is found by dividing their absolute values. The quotient is negative. Thus, for any real numbers a and b, negative a divided by b equals negative a over b. And so again, when you see one sign that's negative, your answer is going to be negative. But if we have the same sign, we are going to have a positive value. So their example is negative a divided by negative b is positive ab. So again, the two negatives build a plus sign, or you can think of it as the opposite of a negative, which would mean a positive. And so the two rules for 0, we have 2 now. The division of 0 and any real number is undefined. And so what we look at that would be, let's say for example we have 3. If we're dividing it by 0, if 0 is in the bottom, or it could be written as 3 divided by 0 this way, that's your undefined. Because we can't divide by 0. That's not possible. Try typing that in the calculator. It will give you a syntax error. However, if 0 is in the top, so 0 divided by 3, or written 0 divided by 3 this way, I can have nothing to share. And so then our answer this way is 0. So here's a couple examples. So again, I know the direction said absolute value, so it means just looking at the distance, which means looking at as positive numbers. So my interpretation of that, again, is to ignore the signs until lastly, and then I'll see what my answer should be, positive or negative. So I look at G as 45 divided by 9, and it is 9 times 5 to get to 45. And two negatives build a plus sign. So I don't have to write the plus sign in my answer. 24 divided by 8. Well, 8 times 3 is 24. One negative in my problem makes my answer negative. For I, we need to flip our second fraction so we can multiply. So negative 3/4. We're going to change it to times, and let's put our 9 over negative 5. When you have a negative sign in a fraction, there's actually 3 different ways that I've seen it written. One is with it in front, like this, negative 3/4. Well, actually, that looks like it's on the top, so let me write it a different way, because that's a way too. The negative of 3/4. Or, as we see down here, with a 9/5, the negative is in the bottom. But as we know, if there's one negative, the whole thing is negative. So it really doesn't matter if you put it out front, up on the top, or on the bottom. So let's get back to this problem. I see 3 and 9 are multiples, but notice they're on the top, so I can't simplify them by dividing. I have to go from the top to a bottom. So let's just multiply straight across. 3 times 9 is 27. And 4 times 5 is 20. Again, notice I was ignoring those negatives. And then when we look at our problem, we have 2 negatives, so they build a plus sign, so our answer is positive. 18 divided by 0 for J. We're dividing by 0, so again, if we were to write it as a fraction, it would be on the bottom. So this is our undefined. Just typing it so you can actually read it better. Whereas for K, we're putting 0 on the top, we have nothing to divide by negative 15, so we still have nothing. And then for L, we're taking 36 and dividing it by 6. 6 times 6 is 36. And 2 negatives below the plus sign, so positive 6. When we're looking at negative signs in parentheses, remember when we talked before about a negative meaning the opposite. So if there's a negative in front of parentheses, it means that everything on the inside goes to its opposite, which means we would change the sign of all of them. And so if we follow that idea, we have a negative of positive 5x, which would be negative 5x. And it's minus 12, so let's think of it as a negative 12. And so we're going to take the opposite of a negative, which would be a positive 12. So everything on the inside is changed as far as the sign goes. Now, the way I like to think of it is that just like before we had invisible ones that aren't needed, I'm going to pull out a 1 here and put it in front of my parentheses with my negative. So I can see that there's a negative 1 that's being multiplied by what's inside the parentheses. So then I distribute. Negative 1 times 3 would be negative 3. And then that has a y. And then 1 times 8 is 8. And a negative times a negative is a positive. So either way, you're switching the signs. Again, I like to think of it as multiplying by negative 1, so I can draw my lines. I can even draw them here without putting that 1 in there, just so I remember that all the signs change. And so for O, notice there's a number out here with a negative. So 3 times 2 is 6. We have an X, and we have 1 negative sign. And then 3 times 5 is 15. And that was 2 negatives, build a plus sign. So again, the sign switched. Notice the 2 was positive. Now the answer 6 is negative. The 5 in here was negative. Our answer for that part was positive. And that's it, folks. So you have your practice problems from section 1.8 to do. If you have any difficulties with them, don't hesitate to send me an email. I'll be more than happy to help you with them. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.